The grand dining room at Moorfield House was a theater of light and shadow, its long mahogany table a gleaming river reflecting the dozens of candles burning in the silver candelabra. At its head sat Alistair, the Duke of Ravenscar, his face handsome but etched with a permanent melancholy that even the finest claret could not erase. To his right, his mother, the Dowager Duchess, presided like a hawk in black silk and diamonds, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The air was thick with the scent of roast pheasant and beeswax, and the low murmur of conversation from the 20 assembled guests. Local gentry, investors from London, men of influence, provided a genteel score to the evening's performance. The Duke had just raised his glass to toast the new railway partnership when the main kitchen doors swung open. But it was not the butler who entered. A woman stood framed in the doorway, and a silence spread outwards from her like ripples in a still pond. Forks were stilled halfway to lips. Wineglasses were set down with a soft click on the linen. She was not in a servant's livery. She wore a simple, high-necked gown of dove-gray wool, a dress of such profound modesty that in this glittering room it was an act of supreme audacity. Her dark hair was coiled in a neat chignon at the nape of her neck, without ornament. Her hands, clasped before her, were clean but unmistakably the hands of someone who worked. It was her face, however, that held the room captive. It was a face of quiet composure, her expression neither defiant nor fearful, but possessed of an unnerving stillness. The Dowager Duchess's wine-glass trembled, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor. Her powdered face seemed to tighten, the blood draining from beneath the rouge. Mr. Finch, the Duke's estate manager seated halfway down the table, made a small, choked sound, his eyes wide with disbelief and terror. The Duke himself simply stared, his own face a mask of profound confusion. He knew that face. He had seen it in miniatures, had carried its memory for over a year like a dull ache in his chest. "Alice?" he breathed, the name a ghost on his lips. She met his gaze across the sea of candlelight, and then she began to walk towards him, her pace unhurried. In her hands, she carried not a silver platter, but a small, worn, leather-bound ledger. But to understand the weight of that ledger, and the silence that followed her steps, we must return to the beginning, 14 months before. If you enjoy stories of quiet strength and long overdue justice, subscribe for more, and let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Their beginning had not been one of rapturous romance, but of quiet, promising accord. Alice Pemberton, daughter of a respected but untitled family, met the Duke of Ravenscar in the library of a mutual acquaintance. While other young ladies spoke of the London season, Alice spoke of crop rotation. Alistair, weary of the brittle performance of aristocratic courtship, found himself unexpectedly engaged. He was a man burdened by title, by sprawling estates he barely understood, and debts his father had left like a shroud. He expected to find a bride who was either a simpering fool or a grasping social climber. He did not expect to find an intellect. He showed her a map of Moorfield, his favored and most neglected estate, and she saw not just lines on a page, but possibilities. "If you were to drain the West Meadow," she had suggested, her finger tracing a contour, "and plant it with clover for 2 seasons, the soil would recover enough for a barley crop that would fetch twice the price of your current yield." He had stared at her, this young woman in a modest muslin dress, and felt a stir of something more potent than attraction: respect. Their courtship was conducted over ledgers and letters. They walked the gardens of her family home, discussing the merits of new American plows and the cost of re-roofing tenant cottages. He found her presence calming, her mind a welcome respite from the gilded cage of his life. A week before she was to travel to London to prepare for the wedding, he gave her a small, simple gift, a silver locket. "Moorfield is the heart of my lands," he told her, his voice softer than she had yet heard it. "And I feel you are to be the heart of Moorfield." Inside the locket was a tiny, exquisitely painted miniature of the estate's great oak. For Alice, it was more precious than any diamond. She was not just marrying a duke. She was entering into a partnership, a life of shared purpose. She packed her trunks for London with a heart full of quiet, steady hope, believing she was going to meet her future. She did not know she was walking into the Dowager Duchess's precisely laid trap. Her arrival at Ravenscar House in London was met not with warmth, but with appraisal. The Dowager Duchess, a woman whose posture had been perfected by decades of social warfare, circled Alice in the grand foyer as if inspecting a horse. "So this is the country mouse Alistair has caught," she murmured, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. The cruelty began there, in 1,000 small, exquisitely calibrated cuts. It was never a direct assault, but a slow, relentless erosion of Alice's confidence. Her wardrobe, carefully chosen and made by her local modiste, was deemed charming in a provincial sort of way, and immediately replaced by gowns of the dowager's choosing. Colors that washed her out, styles that did not suit her frame. At dinner, if Alice offered an opinion on estate management, a topic she and Alistair had so freely discussed, the dowager would smile thinly. "My dear girl," she would say, her voice carrying to every guest at the table. "In London, we leave such dreary matters to the men. A lady's mind is a delicate thing, not to be cluttered with crop yields and coin." The Duke was away, touring his northern properties, a trip the dowager insisted was essential before the wedding. His letters, once frequent and warm, became sporadic, then ceased altogether. "Alistair is terribly occupied," the dowager would explain, tapping a letter she did not offer Alice to read. "The duties of a duke are immense. He trusts me to prepare you for your new station." The preparation was, in fact, an education in insignificance. Alice was taught that her opinions were irrelevant, her knowledge an embarrassment, and her purpose was to be a silent, beautiful vessel for the Ravenscar name. She was instructed to rest in her rooms for hours each day, to preserve her complexion, a form of elegant imprisonment that left her isolated and alone in the cavernous, silent house. The staff, taking their cue from their mistress, treated her with a cool, distant deference that was more isolating than outright hostility. Her personal maid, a girl from her own village, was dismissed for a supposed impertinence, replaced by a stern-faced woman who reported Alice's every word and action to the dowager. Alice felt as if she were being systematically erased, her own thoughts and personality sanded down until nothing remained but a smooth, polished surface suitable for public display. She held on to the silver locket, a secret talisman against the encroaching despair, a reminder of the man who had respected her mind, a man who seemed to have vanished entirely. The humiliation intensified, becoming a daily ritual. At a small afternoon salon, the dowager would move through the drawing room making introductions, seamlessly passing by Alice as if she were a piece of furniture. When a guest, confused, would ask who the young lady by the window was, the dowager would laugh lightly. "Oh, that is merely Miss Pemberton. She is a rather shy creature, quite overwhelmed by the city." The lie was delivered with such maternal concern that it was Alice who appeared awkward and ill-mannered. Mr. Finch, the Duke's estate manager, was a frequent visitor to Ravenscar House, always in conference with the dowager. When Alice, desperate for a connection, to the life she had been promised, requested to see the Moorfield accounts. He adopted an air of patronizing sympathy. "Your Grace," he would begin, addressing her with a title she did not yet hold, a subtle mockery in itself. "The Duchess has these matters well in hand. There is no need for you to trouble your pretty head with such dry figures." His smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. One afternoon, standing in the upstairs corridor, she overheard the Dowager speaking with her sister through the half-open door of her private sitting room. "The girl has a surprisingly stubborn streak," the Dowager said, her voice stripped of its public charm. "She asks questions. It is most unbecoming. Alistair was foolish to be taken in by a provincial bluestocking, but her bloodline is acceptable, and the contract is ironclad. Once she is married and produces an heir, she will learn to be content with her jewels and her drawing room." Her sister murmured something inaudible. The Dowager's reply was sharp. "Oh, she will learn, or she will be taught. The Ravenscar name is not a plaything for a clever farmer's daughter." Alice stood frozen in the hallway, a book of poetry trembling in her hand. It was then she understood. This was not a trial to be endured before happiness could begin. This was the shape of her entire future. She was not to be a partner, but a broodmare and a decoration. Her intelligence a defect to be managed and suppressed. The grand house, with its silk-hung walls and polished floors, felt like a tomb. She wrote a frantic, heartfelt letter to Alistair, pouring out her confusion and distress, begging for his return. She entrusted it to her new maid for posting. Weeks passed, and no reply came. The silence was his answer, and it broke something inside her. Or rather, it hardened something that had been soft and hopeful into cold, clear resolve. She would not be broken. She would endure. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place a week before the Duke's scheduled return. Alice, feigning a headache to escape another stultifying afternoon, was confined to her rooms. From the corridor, she heard the low, conspiratorial tones of the Dowager and Mr. Finch. She crept to the door, pressing her ear against the heavy oak. "The contracts are prepared," Finch was saying, his voice slick with greed. "With her signature forged on the relinquishment document, the Moorfield timber rights and the West Meadow lands can be sold directly to the railway consortium. The price is £40,000. A sharp intake of breath from the Dowager. "And Alistair will be none the wiser? He will believe the funds came from my prudent management of the northern mines," Finch assured her. "As for the girl, it is all arranged. Dr. Hemlock will attest to a sudden bout of nervous fever. She will be taken to a private sanatorium in the countryside to recover her strength before the wedding. By the time the Duke arrives, she will be gone. We will tell him she took fright, a simple country girl overwhelmed by her duties, and broke the engagement. Her family will be informed she has had a breakdown and requires absolute seclusion. No one will question it." The Dowager's voice was cold as ice. "And the money?" "Will be transferred to a holding company under my name, from which we can draw to restore the family's fortunes. And our own," Finch finished. Alice backed away from the door, a wave of nausea washing over her. They were not just trying to control her. They were plotting to rob Alistair of his most beloved asset, using her as a pawn and a scapegoat. They would steal his land, forge her name, and then have her locked away as a madwoman, all while playing the part of the concerned mother and the loyal servant. Her isolation was not an unfortunate side effect of the Dowager's pride. It was a calculated strategy. They had cut her off from everyone who knew her, intercepted her letters, and painted her as a fragile, unstable creature. Who would believe her word against that of a duchess and a trusted manager? In that moment, the fear that had been her constant companion for months burned away, replaced by a white-hot, clarifying anger. They had mistaken her quiet endurance for weakness. They had mistaken her intelligence for a charming quirk. They were about to discover how gravely they had misjudged her. That night, she did not sleep. She planned. Her one ally in the house was a young scullery maid named Mary, a girl from a tenant farm near Moorfield, who still looked at Alice with kindness in her eyes. Using the excuse of needing a hot compress for her headache, Alice summoned her. She did not plead or weep. She spoke quietly and directly, laying out just enough of the truth. "They mean to send me away," she said, "and they are cheating the Duke." Mary, who had seen the Dowager's cruelty firsthand and whose family suffered under Finch's management, did not hesitate. Before dawn, Alice was dressed in one of Mary's rough wool dresses, her hair hidden under a shawl. In a small bundle, she carried only two things of value: the silver locket from Alistair and the original marriage contract, which she had retrieved from a locked box in her writing desk while the house slept. Mary led her through the labyrinthine servants' corridors, down to a tradesman's entrance that opened onto a foggy London mews. With the few sovereigns she had hidden in her mattress, Alice bought a ticket on a northbound mail coach, not to her family home, where the Dowager's lies would surely have preceded her, but to the village of Oakshott, which bordered the Moorfield estate. She would not run home in disgrace. She would go to the heart of the conspiracy. She arrived at Moorfield a stranger, gaunt and exhausted. She presented herself at the kitchen door of the great house, giving her name as Anna, a distant cousin of Mary's from London seeking work. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, was a shrewd, kind woman who had served the old Duke and held no love for the Dowager. She saw the desperation and the intelligence in the young woman's eyes, and against her better judgment, gave her a position as an undercook. For 14 months, Alice Pemberton disappeared, and Anna, the kitchen maid, was born. She scrubbed floors, peeled vegetables, and learned the rhythm of the great house from the bottom up. The kitchens were a nexus of information. Here she heard the grooms gossiping about the felling of the ancient oaks in the East Wood, the tenant farmers complaining of Finch's brutal rent increases, and the visiting accountants muttering about irregularities in the estate books. Every evening, in her small attic room, by the light of a single tallow candle, she began her true work. She salvaged discarded account ledgers from the rubbish heap, piecing together the estate's true income. She carefully compared the household expenses she saw every day with the figures Finch submitted to London. Slowly, painstakingly, she built her own set of books, a shadow ledger that documented a grand and systematic theft. Her hands grew calloused, but her mind grew sharper. And she baked. In particular, she baked a honey-glazed oat bread, a recipe from her own family, its warm, sweet scent filling the kitchens. It became a favorite in the servants' hall, and one day, a loaf made its way to the Duke's own breakfast table on one of his rare, melancholic visits. It was a small act of existence, a single persistent note of truth in a house built on lies. The announcement arrived by post. The Duke would be hosting a grand dinner at Moorfield in 3 weeks' time to celebrate a new partnership with the Great Northern Railway. The Dowager Duchess and Mr. Finch would be the guests of honor. Alice knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the moment she had been working towards. The railway was the consortium to whom they had sold the land and timber. This dinner was to be the celebration of their crime, the public consecration of their success. It would, instead, be their reckoning. The day of the dinner, a frantic energy seized the house. Downstairs, silver was polished to a mirror shine, and crystal glasses were arranged in glittering battalions. In the kitchens, the head chef shouted orders amid the clatter of copper pans and the searing heat of the great stove. But Alice moved through the chaos with a preternatural calm. In the afternoon, she slipped away to her attic room. She bathed in the small hip bath, scrubbing the grime of the scullery from her skin. She had no fine gown, no jewels. But with the wages she had painstakingly saved, she had purchased a length of good gray wool from the village draper. Mary, her needle flying, had helped her fashion it into a simple, perfectly fitted gown. It was the uniform of a woman who had no need for ornament, whose substance was her shield. She brushed her dark hair until it shone, coiling it not in the elaborate style of the gentry, but in the neat, severe chignon of a governess or a clerk. From a loose floorboard beneath her narrow bed, she retrieved her weapons, her small, meticulously kept ledger, and the original marriage contract Alistair had signed. She looked at her reflection in the small, cracked piece of mirror tacked to the wall. The frightened, bewildered girl who had fled London was gone. In her place stood a woman forged in silence and labor, her gaze steady, her purpose absolute. Meanwhile, in the main guest suite, the Dowager Duchess was being laced into a gown of black silk and jet beads, her face a mask of triumphant satisfaction. Mr. Finch, preening in his evening wear, imagined the toast he would give, celebrating the prosperity he had brought to the estate. They were both entirely blissfully oblivious. They saw only the success of their scheme, blind to the quiet, lethal competence of the woman they had dismissed and tried to destroy. The great clock in the hall struck 8. The dinner was in full swing, the air shimmering with candlelight and self-congratulation. The Duke, looking haunted but performing his duties as host, rose to his feet, his wineglass held aloft. "My lords, ladies, and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying through the room, "I wish to propose a toast to new ventures, to the future of Moorfield, and to the partnership with the Great Northern Railway, which promises a new era of prosperity for us all." He gave a nod to his mother and to Mr. Finch, who inclined his head with a smug smile. "To the future," the guests echoed, the sound of clinking crystal filling the air. It was at that moment, as the butler and footman prepared to serve the main course, that the kitchen doors opened. Alice entered. The scene, as witnessed in the flash-forward, unfolded with the slow, inexorable gravity of a dream. The collective intake of breath, the silence, the Duke's whispered, disbelieving, "Alice." She walked the length of the room, her gray dress a stark statement of intent against the glittering silks and satins. The Dowager Duchess rose halfway from her seat, her face contorted with fury. "What is the meaning of this? How dare you seize this woman?" But no servant moved. They stood frozen, their loyalty for the first time uncertain. Alice did not look at the Dowager. Her eyes were fixed on the Duke. She reached the head of the table and stopped, standing beside him. She placed her small, worn ledger on the polished mahogany, next to his plate of untouched pheasant. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it was so clear and steady that it cut through the shocked silence of the room. "Your Grace," she said, "for 14 months, I have been an employee in your household. I have baked your bread, and I have balanced your books." She opened the ledger. The pages were filled with neat, precise columns of figures. "Mr. Finch, your trusted manager, sold the timber rights to the East Wood for £30,000. of which your estate received 5. He sold the West Meadow to the railway for an additional 40,000, a sum which never appeared in your accounts at all. He has done so using this. She produced the original marriage contract, holding it up for the Duke to see. With my signature forged on a document of relinquishment, authorized and witnessed by your mother, who then arranged for my disappearance. A collective gasp went through the room. All eyes turned to the Dowager and to Finch, who now looked as if he might faint. The Duke stared at the ledger, then at his mother, the truth dawning on his face with sickening force. The Dowager found her voice, a venomous hiss. She is a liar, a mad, hysterical girl who fled her duties. Alice finally turned her gaze upon the Dowager. There was no anger in her expression, only a devastating clarity. She delivered her final, quiet line. You feared I was not fit to be a duchess. You were right. I am no duchess. I am a bookkeeper. She gave a small, formal nod to the Duke, turned without another word, and walked out of the dining room, leaving a ruin of reputations behind her. The aftermath was as swift and brutal as the Dowager's own social tactics. The dinner party disintegrated into chaos. Confronted with Alice's ledger, every fraudulent transaction documented, every missing pound accounted for, Mr. Finch collapsed entirely, confessing everything in a desperate, blubbering plea for mercy. The representatives from the railway, horrified at being party to a fraud, immediately began proceedings to nullify the land sales. Finch was arrested before the night was out, taken away by the local constable in disgrace. The Duke's confrontation with his mother was a far more private and perhaps more terrible affair. There were no public charges. The scandal of a dowager duchess being implicated in a criminal conspiracy was too great for the family name to bear. But her power was irrevocably broken. Within a week, she was gone from Moorfield, exiled to a remote and crumbling dower house on the Welsh coast, with a skeleton staff and a modest allowance. Her name was never again spoken in the Duke's presence. Invitations to Ravenscar House ceased. Her reign was over. Alistair, shattered by the dual betrayal and shamed by his own blindness, formally dissolved the marriage contract. He sent a solicitor to the village inn where Alice had taken rooms, with a message offering a generous settlement and a promise to restore her to her family with her reputation cleared. Alice accepted the annulment but refused the money. She had her own plans. She did not return to her family, nor did she seek a place in society. Instead, she remained in the village of Oakshott. With the small amount of money she had saved and a loan secured against her good name from the local vicar, she established a tenants' cooperative. She used the very knowledge of estate management the Dowager had so disdained, teaching the farmers how to manage their accounts, how to bargain collectively for better prices on seed and equipment, and how to invest their profits. She worked not from a grand drawing room, but from a small office at the back of the bakery. Respect for her grew not from a title she had been denied, but from the competence and integrity she demonstrated every day. The community of Moorfield, so long oppressed by Finch and neglected by its Duke, slowly began to heal, its recovery guided by the quiet, steady hand of the woman they had known only as Anna, the baker of bread. A year passed. Autumn returned to the Moorfield estate, turning the remaining oaks to gold and rust. Alice stood on a small rise overlooking the West Meadow, the very land she had saved. Below, the foundations for a new village schoolhouse were being laid, funded entirely by the profits of the tenants' cooperative. She was no longer the pale, haunted girl from the Ravenscar kitchens, but a woman in her prime, her face touched by the sun, her posture confident and serene. The sound of an approaching carriage made her turn. It was not the grand ducal coach, but a simple, unadorned traveling chaise. A single figure emerged. It was the Duke. He was dressed not in the fine tailoring of a London aristocrat, but in a simple tweed riding coat and dusty boots. He was thinner than she remembered, the melancholy in his eyes replaced by a deep, weary humility. He approached her slowly, stopping a respectful few feet away. He did not offer apologies or excuses. He simply looked at the schoolhouse, then back at her. "I have spent a year putting my house in order, Miss Pemberton," he said, his voice quiet. "I have studied the books, your books. I see now that I was the master of an estate I did not begin to understand." He gestured towards the works below. "I was told you were building a school." Alice nodded, her expression composed. "The children have been learning in the church hall. It is too small." He met her gaze directly, and for the first time, she saw the man she had first met in the library, the man who had spoken of partnership and purpose. "May I be permitted to invest in it?" he asked. It was not a demand or a ducal pronouncement, but a simple, humble request. He was not offering charity. He was asking to be a part of the world she had built. For a long moment, she was silent, the crisp autumn wind stirring the ribbons of her bonnet. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was an answer. It was a beginning. For a title may grant a man an estate, but only character can make it a home. Thank you for joining us for this story of quiet vindication. Did the Duke deserve a second chance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and tell us where you are watching from today. We look forward to sharing another story with you very soon. For pride may wear diamonds, but character is a jewel that lasts forever.